April 12, 1861. The first shots of the American Civil War are fired at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. What began as a skirmish over secession would turn into one of the deadliest conflicts in American history, a war that would define the future of the nation. But what led to this violent confrontation? What did it cost, and how did it reshape the United States forever? The divide between North and South ran deep long before the war began. This division was not just geographical but also deeply rooted in contrasting ideologies and ways of life. Economic differences, cultural tensions, and the institution of slavery were key flashpoints. The North, with its burgeoning industries, was a stark contrast to the agrarian South, which depended heavily on slave labor. The North was rapidly industrializing, with factories and railroads transforming its landscape. Meanwhile, the South's economy relied on agriculture, particularly cotton and the labor of enslaved people. But did you know that by the time of the war, cotton made up more than half of the U.S. S exports? This single crop was the backbone of the Southern economy and a significant player in international trade. It was called King Cotton because of how crucial it was to the global economy. The South believed that their cotton was so essential that it would force foreign nations to support their cause. This wealth, however, was built on the backs of nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans in the South. Their forced labor was the engine that drove the Southern economy. Efforts to abolish slavery gained momentum in the North with figures like Harriet Tubman, who helped hundreds escape via the Underground Railroad. Abolitionist movements were growing stronger, demanding an end to the inhumane practice. But in the South, the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final straw. His anti-slavery stance was seen as a direct threat to their way of life and economic interests. 11 Southern states seceded and formed the Confederacy, fearing Lincoln would destroy their way of life. This act of secession set the stage for a conflict that would become one of the most defining moments in American history. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter. The Civil War had officially begun. The North, led by President Lincoln, saw the war as a fight to preserve the Union. The South, under President Jefferson Davis, fought for independence and states' rights, especially the right to maintain slavery. The First Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, in July 1861, showed both sides this wouldn't be a quick or easy war. In fact, picnickers from Washington, D.C. came to watch the battle, thinking the Union would crush the South. Spoiler, they didn't. Confederate forces won, sending spectators fleeing. As the war dragged on, several key battles marked turning points that would shape the course of American history. The Battle of Antietam in 1862 was the bloodiest single day in American history, with over 22,000 casualties in just one day. This battle was not just a clash of armies but a pivotal moment that would influence the nation's future. This horror gave President Abraham Lincoln the momentum he needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that would redefine the war's purpose. Did you know the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all enslaved people right away? It was a strategic move aimed at weakening the Confederacy. It only applied to Confederate states, leaving those in Union border states like Kentucky and Missouri still in bondage. This selective freedom highlighted the complex nature of the war. Still, this transformed the Civil War from a battle to preserve the Union into a crusade for human freedom and equality. It was no longer just about keeping the Union together. It became a moral fight against the institution of slavery, galvanizing abolitionist movements across the North. And the Confederacy's hope of foreign support from countries like Britain and France crumbled, as neither wanted to back a war in defense of slavery. This international dimension added another layer of complexity to the conflict, isolating the Confederacy further. In July 1863, the war reached its bloodiest and most decisive moment at Gettysburg. This small town in Pennsylvania became the focal point of a massive and brutal conflict that would shape the future of the United States. Over 3 days, the Union and Confederate forces clashed in what became the largest battle ever fought on American soil. The sheer scale of the battle was unprecedented, with over 165,000 soldiers engaged in fierce combat. Union forces under General George Meade finally halted Confederate General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North. This was a turning point in the war, as Lee had hoped a victory on Northern soil would sway public opinion and gain foreign support for the Confederacy. One of the most famous moments of the battle was Pickett's charge, when 12,500 Confederate soldiers charged across open fields into devastating Union fire. This bold but ill-fated assault resulted in massive casualties and is often cited as a critical mistake by Lee. Less than half made it back. The fields were littered with the fallen, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting and the high cost of the charge. Lee's army was never able to mount a serious invasion of the North again. The defeat at Gettysburg marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, as they were forced into a defensive stance for the remainder of the war. Months later, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, a speech that lasted just 2 minutes but became one of the most iconic in American history. In just 272 words, Lincoln redefined the purpose of the war and the meaning of American democracy. Fun fact, Lincoln thought his speech was a failure at the time. How wrong he was. Today, the Gettysburg Address is remembered as a profound statement of American ideals and a tribute to those who fought and died at Gettysburg. The Civil War was also a time of incredible innovation. It was the first war in history to see widespread use of railroads, telegraphs, and even balloons for reconnaissance. At sea, the battle between the ironclad ships USS Monitor and CSS Virginia in 1862 was a game-changer. These ironclads made wooden ships obsolete practically overnight. By 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman began a brutal campaign across the South, famously declaring that, "War is hell." His march to the sea left a trail of destruction, burning Atlanta to the ground and crippling the South's economy. With Confederate resources exhausted, on April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. But here's a curiosity. Even after Lee's surrender, fighting continued in some areas for weeks. The last battle, the Battle of Palmito Ranch, occurred in Texas more than a month later. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history. Over 600,000 men died, more than in all other U.S. wars combined up until the Vietnam War. Entire cities were destroyed, and the South was left in ruins. The human cost was staggering. 1 out of every 4 soldiers who went to war never returned, and countless more were wounded, traumatized, or left homeless. The South's economy was devastated, and it would take decades for the region to recover. The war ended slavery, but it was only the beginning of the long, painful process of Reconstruction. The 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery, but the struggle for civil rights was far from over. The Reconstruction era saw some progress, with African Americans briefly gaining political power, even electing black members of Congress. But white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan rose in response, and by the late 1870s, segregation and Jim Crow laws would enforce racial inequality for nearly a century. The American Civil War was more than just a battle between North and South. It was a war for the future of the United States, a fight for freedom, equality, and the survival of the Union. Its legacy lives on today, reminding us that the struggle for justice is far from over. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And let us know in the comments which moment from the Civil War fascinates you the most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next deep dive into history.